What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're going to be diving back into 2019 and taking a look at the running back position, specifically those running backs on the waiver wires that really gave us a boost throughout the season. While 2019 may not be as impactful of a year for waiver wire running backs as compared to previous seasons, there still were players who in spurts posted incredible numbers and some other players that wound up being consistent starters that you could rely on weekly for large stretches of the season. Continue to follow along for further developments in this series where we take a look at the things in 2019 that stick out to us the most and use that to apply towards our 2020 preparation. If you do enjoy this video, please do hit that like button, but without further ado, let's get right into the video. There are 4 running backs that we are going to go over, and while this is in no particular order, a great one to start with is going to be Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray was drafted in most leagues and was overall a disappointment for the first few weeks of the season, when we soon came to realize that the Mark Ingram role, which included increased volume in blowout situations and the primary ball handler for short yardage and goal line duties, he did in fact get a lot of that type of volume, but it wasn't being able to be put together consistently enough for any fantasy relevant impact. That was soon followed up with an injury to Drew Brees that left him out for several weeks of the season, overall hindering the potential upside for the offense and the amount of touches that was projected to go to Latavius Murray, which translated to a lot of owners dumping him to free agency and the waiver wire. Up until that point of the season, he hadn't been performing particularly well with the amount of volume he was given, and with the projected decrease in scoring opportunities, nobody could be to blame for dropping him off of their team. For the first 4 weeks after Drew Brees went down, Latavius Murray himself did not have a single double-digit rush attempt performance, no more than 3 targets, and in half PPR scoring, had a high through that span in fantasy points of just 7.9 points. Now, things were going to change soon, and the reason he made it on this list was for this reason, because Alvin Kamara was dealing with an injury, and Latavius Murray was going to be the next man up. We knew he was going to get a significant increase in volume, which ultimately led Latavius Murray to be one of the top waiver adds, and one of the easiest players to go ahead and put in plug-and-play situations for daily fantasy. Those of whom that did were massively rewarded. In that first game without Kamara, he had 32 total touches, 150 total yards from scrimmage, and even reached pay dirt twice. This was against a tough Chicago defense, which although they were trending downward at defending the run at this point in the season, was still thought of as one of the most aggressive and talented defenses in the entire league. Ultimately, though, he was on borrowed time, and Alvin Kamara was expected to return inevitably. For that reason, opportunistic owners did have to take full advantage while they could. Kamara is going to return and take the majority of the workload in the running and receiving game from the backfield upon his return. But for this 2-week span, Latavius Murray was one running back you did not want to see in your opponent's lineup for this small stretch of the season. In week 8, he came and faced Arizona with Drew Brees back on his first game. And from a fantasy perspective, Latavius Murray outperformed himself the previous week, hauling in a rushing and a receiving touchdown, over 100 rushing yards, and over 50 receiving yards. He had a clear use in the receiving game, boasting 12 targets and catching 9 of them, and in these 2 games while Alvin Kamara was out, he had scored over 54 points in a half PPR scoring setting. Unfortunately for him though, that's where his story of fantasy success really ends. He's one of the premier handcuffs in the leagues, but outside of that, he really can't be trusted from a volume perspective, even while he was on the potent New Orleans offense. Now without Drew Brees, it leaves a big question mark onto what his involvement and role in the offense is going to be moving forward, but one thing that is for sure, his impact was certainly felt off of the waiver wire in weeks 7 and 8, helping a lot of teams cement themselves as either playoff contenders or giving those underdogs that little push that they needed to survive some of those midseason injuries. Regardless, we're going to move over to the next player, and the next high impact fantasy waiver wire RB is Kenyan Drake of the Miami Dolphins and Arizona Cardinals. As we know, Kenyan Drake was traded about midway through the season. Up until the trade, he was very disappointing for fantasy owners. He was a mid-tier running back taken to be a high-end flex, low-end 2, one with some obvious volatility, but with what a lot of people thought would be guaranteed volume and production on an offense that would be playing from behind, suiting his skill set quite well, that of a pass-catching running back. Unfortunately, when the season did start, Miami did have struggles getting him involved into the offense. He wasn't getting a high amount of targets, nor more attempts from out of the backfield on a consistent basis, and this was really hindering his overall fantasy production. While the other pieces around him were getting injured from the running back position, his volume wasn't going up. The pieces around him, however, their volume was increasing. Overall, Miami did deem him expendable and traded him over to the Arizona Cardinals, who've been dealing with a plethora of injuries themselves. David Johnson and Chase Edmonds were both injured at this point, leaving Kenyan Drake really the only option available to them. Right away you could tell Kenyan Drake was a match in Cliff Kingsbury's high-powered offense, and Kenyan Drake was both receiving and rushing out of the backfield with very much success against one of the league's toughest defenses in that of the 49ers. In his first game as a Cardinal, he had 15 attempts for 110 yards, a rushing touchdown, and caught 4 of 4 targets for an additional 52 yards on top of that. This backfield did become more healthy as the season progressed, but there was no game since acquisition that Kenyan Drake was under 14 total touches. So from that trade forward, you could lock him in as an RB2 and feel comfortable with that up until playoffs. And if you did end up doing that in the playoffs, you were massively rewarded. He had 2 of the best performances of the entire playoffs in back-to-back weeks, weeks 15 and 16. In those weeks, he faced Cleveland and Seattle, had 26 touches in each of those games, scored 5 times, and posted no less than 31.9 half PPR points in each of those contests. Considering that that is championship weekend and the weekend to make it into the championships, his impact was definitely felt across the board, and if you were one of the lucky ones to be able to start him, you probably won your championship. We're going to move over to a player who's a little less flashy, a little more slow and steady wins the race, and that's Ronald Jones of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, Tampa Bay, they had a high-powered offense right from the get-go, but the running game on that team never really came together. It was a lot of passing yardage, a lot of fourth-quarter production, and the volume mainly split in the running game between Peyton Barber and Ronald Jones. We did see a transition, however, in 2019 more to Ronald Jones, and while the reins were never 100% his, Ronald Jones still managed to finish as the RB26 and put together some pretty consistent numbers in the process. This was a player who for many teams did reach the waiver wire and did accumulate 1,000 total scrimmage yards throughout the season while scoring the ball 6 total times. He averaged 4.2 yards per carry and nearly 10 yards per reception, so overall, it was a pretty impressive season for the sophomore coming off of a slump. There was never a given week where Ronald Jones was a game-winning or week-winning type of running back, but he did post top 30 running back numbers in over 50% of his games, scored double-digit fantasy points in 7 of 16 games, and came in on fantasy championship weekend, posting 18.4 half PPR points, which is seriously respectable, his second highest total of the season. Now, what's to be expected from him from this point forward? Well, hopefully, we're going to see more involvement from him in the future and less involvement from Peyton Barber, but that's in no way guaranteed. Barber should not be considered serious competition. He does have flashes of excellence, but overall has a 3.6 yards per carry career average and has not averaged over 4 yards per carry since his rookie season in 2016. He vultured away 6 touchdowns on the ground, also had decent involvement in the receiving game, so if we do see Ronald Jones continue to improve and continue to be more involved in this offense, seeing some of that production, some of that volume that went to Peyton Barber last season should find its way to Ronald Jones. Considering he finished as RB26 last season, if he is to see any increased volume and opportunity share moving forward, a consistent RB2 is not a stretch whatsoever for 2020. The final player on this list, which shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, is Raheem Mostert of the San Francisco 49ers, made famous for his massive performance against Green Bay, in which he ran for 220 yards, scored 4 times, while notching another 2 receptions on top of that, which then guaranteed the San Francisco 49ers their spot in Super Bowl 54. Raheem Mostert wasn't always the fantasy stud that he was to finish the season. From week 12 on, he really dominated, but leading up to that, he scored 5 or more fantasy points in the first 11 weeks just 3 times. Raheem Mostert was 100% one of the easiest players to find on the waiver wires, and one of the ones who was super impactful since being acquired and thrust into starting lineups. As we know, this backfield leading into the season was extremely crowded scouted, there was Jerick McKinnon, Matt Breida, Tevin Coleman, and Raheem Mostert, who predictably were all going to share work in this backfield, limiting the potential fantasy upside for each individual player. Each one of these backs has the ability to catch the ball from the backfield. Each one is also a capable pass blocker with explosive playmaking ability. Usually a common phrase is follow the money, and if you do follow the money, Raheem Mostert would not have been your guy. But when it came down to it, Raheem Mostert was chosen to lead this backfield and even led the team in touches in the Super Bowl itself. Touching the ball the most out of all the running backs on this roster in the game that matters most does say a lot about their faith in Raheem Mostert moving forward. His talent alone should garner some attention in that RB2 type territory for 2020, but that's a little bit ahead of ourselves. We're going to have to see how that team shapes up and what that backfield is looking like during the summer. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hope you enjoyed. Like I said, stay tuned. We are going to be going further into this series about things that we can learn and apply towards our 2020 draft process and preparation process. So if you're new, please be sure to subscribe. If you do enjoy this video, please hit that like button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.